We've been picking apart what I mean, the Post newspaper this morning has a kind of odd cartoon, and its headline is Budget 2023. Not the budget, not the mother of all budgets, not the second cousin twice removed of all budgets, not the austerity budget or the black budget. It's just the budget. And it's kind of boring. I wonder, and look, as I said, Grant Robertson, you're more than welcome to ring in, Grant, despite the ban the Labor Party has on the platform. We've heard from Nicola Willis. We've heard from Eric Crampton. We're hearing now from the man who came out with an alternate budget, David Seymour, the leader of the ACT Party. David, welcome back to the platform. Are you suitably underwhelmed by what occurred yesterday afternoon?
I'm not underwhelmed. I'm quite angry. You've got a government that has acknowledged in a fiscal hole, and instead of trimming the sails or at least showing a little bit of responsibility, they have gone and decided to borrow $10 billion more over the next 2 years, even than they had planned as of 6 months ago at the December economic update. Let me just say that again. Compared with the forecast in December, this year and next year, government borrowing will be up $10 billion on what was previously expected. And we're not going to see a surplus for 6 years since COVID, 6 years of deficits. And you've got to remember, last time we did that, we had the GFC and 2 major earthquakes that sent the government into deficit. Just because of COVID, largely their own policies, they have given us 6 years of deficit. And what does that mean for people? Well, if you happen to have hit the trifecta, if you're a high user of prescriptions, you happen to have a 2-year-old or a kid that will soon be 2 in your household, and you've got kids that like to take the bus a lot, i.e. you live in a part of New Zealand where that's viable, then maybe, just maybe, the money you get out of this budget will make up for the inflation and interest rate increases that will come, no matter what Treasury says, when the government runs an unexpected $10 billion deficit. You're going to get inflation. And that means you're going to get higher mortgage rates. So this is a budget that is recklessly irresponsible. I don't think that they care a fig about New Zealand. What they are interested in doing is winning the next election, much like Robert Muldoon long before them, keeping things going long enough so they can get another 3 years.
David, I'd argue that this is hardly, though, a lolly scramble budget. There's hardly any huge largesse in there. They've kind of doubled down on the debt to keep things going, but it's not like anyone's going to be singing their praises or dancing in the streets on this. As you've just pointed out, you'd have to have a most unusual set of personal circumstances to really see any financial gain for a family or household from this budget.
With respect, Sean, you're making the same mistake that many in the media have. Labor want this budget to be about the handouts, about the prescriptions, about the public transport, about the early childhood education for 2-year-olds. What they don't want you to see is the big picture, that $10 billion of unscripted deficit spending, extra borrowing, extra deficit cash pumped into the economy will be inflationary. The Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr, can only now respond with a higher official cash rate than he would have otherwise.
Yep.
Banks are already trying to soften up their customers, saying, we think interest rates are going to go higher because they will. And just imagine, say, you got a $500,000 mortgage. Now, just imagine that this budget pushes mortgage rates 0.5% higher than they would otherwise be for 2 years. Well, that's $5,000. That's $100 a week right there from this mortgage. Even if you are getting some of the goodies, then you are worse off. If you're one of those New Zealanders who doesn't live in an area of good public transport, which is basically everyone, doesn't happen to have a 2-year-old, which is most of us, and doesn't take more than a few prescriptions a year, and you don't get any of those benefits, but you will pay more on interest, more on inflation.
What if I'm a video game developer, though, David?
Well, again, I mean, that's just another shocker. If Grant Robertson knows what to invest in the tech industry, then he's very welcome to take his own superannuation and throw it into video game development. But the truth is he hasn't, because he doesn't know anything more about what businesses to invest in than you or I. In fact, I suspect he might know less. And as a result, he's now taking $160 million of your and my money and investing it in something that he thinks will give him a good photo op, just like Stephen Joyce before him. I mean, you can only be angry at this budget, Sean. What this country needed was what ACT proposed in its alternative budget. Go through everything the government does and ask, if this activity, if this department did not exist today, would we actually decide to start it anew? And for so many activities, the answer is no. We showed how we could have actually reduced spending, got rid of the deficit, taken pressure off interest rates, given people a break, and most importantly, reduced taxes and flatten tax rates to establish a culture of achievement and success. This is a culture of mediocrity, of pointlessness, where the only way you get ahead is if the government gives you a handout.
What would be the first things in this budget then that you would you roll back if you were part of the next government?
Well, first of all, we wouldn't be spending $139 billion. We'd be asking how many of the additional 14,000...
I said, what in this budget would you roll back, be the first thing you'd roll back if you take the Treasury benches after October?
Well, I'm answering that question. Everything in this budget is underpinned by those 14,000 extra bureaucrats. We would go back to the size of the public service. I'm not talking police, I'm not talking teachers, I'm not talking nurses or doctors, I'm talking bureaucrats in Wellington. We'd take that size back to the size that Labor inherited in 2017, and then we'd say, right, what can we deliver at that cost, not what can we force on the rest of New Zealand in a series of ideological experiments. So there's $1 billion right there. The next thing that we would do is we would not give a first-year free education to every single 18-year-old that goes to uni, because that program costs hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It hasn't got more disadvantaged kids at school. The real issue is that they haven't actually managed to get to university in the first place because our system of education is failing. Kids aren't even showing up, let alone learning enough.
Yeah.
So, you can go through line by line as our alternative budget does. It shows a total of $38 billion in spending reductions over the 4-year forecast period. That's what a responsible government would do. These guys haven't done that. Instead, they've gone the opposite direction, and they're going to borrow $10 billion more than what we thought they would even just 6 months ago.
Would you be spending $34 million on kapa haka over 2 years?
Look, I can't see it. I don't generally believe that it's up to the government to pay for entertainment. I know it's a long-standing tradition. The Roman emperors used to bring people in and kill them in the Colosseum as entertainment.
Bread and circuses.
I don't think that... Yeah, bread, exactly. I don't think the government should fund entertainment. I mean, I know some people will be against it because it's kapa haka. I don't have an issue with funding it on the same basis as every other type of entertainment the government's funding. I think that should be equitable no matter what culture it is. My question is, are they overfunding it because it is Maori, or are they doing it because there's demand for it? And second of all, should the government be spending tens of millions of dollars funding entertainment, when I would have thought something more important would be what ACT proposed, and that is to actually build the youth justice facilities and fund the prison spaces so that the people who are shooting 15-year-old girls on the motorway and beating up people savagely on Key Street have a place the judge can send them. Before we get into kapa haka or the opera or the ballet, I'd rather just make it a place where it's safe to run a jewellery store or a dairy. So, my issue is, what have they done about crime in this budget? Absolutely nothing. What have they done about people's cost of living? Absolutely nothing. And what have they done about co-government? Well, actually, they have further accelerated the division of expenditure based on race. None of this is going to take New Zealand where the majority of us who pay the taxes would like it to go.
All right, David, just two other things I want to cover off quickly, and it's occurred to me over the last couple of days. Would you expect to be Minister of Finance in a National Act government?
Well, I don't expect any position. I do expect policy. So the question's pretty simple. If a smart person goes for a job, they ask, well, what will I be able to do in this job? What can I achieve? If a national government is prepared to do the kind of things that are required to get New Zealand back to first world status, I would take the job. If it's a question of, being the figurehead for National Party policies, which aren't much different from Labour, then no thank you. I'm not going to ruin my reputation for bad policy and ministerial salary.
Okay, but you'd be happy with Nicola Willis being Finance Minister if they were doing some of the policies and you negotiated some of the things you wanted in the finance policy.
Yeah, and hey, you never know. She might not want to be Finance Minister if she has to carry out an ACT agenda of rational economic policy. The difficulty here is that the Nats, having not produced anything, that their rhetoric is strong, but unlike ACT, they have not laid out line by line how they would do things differently. And so at this point, it's really quite difficult to know if I'd want the job because I don't know what our partner actually has in mind for finance.
All right, maybe you should have a cup of tea with them. Look, the other issue very quickly, and it's interesting, I think this story was dropped by the Herald today or in the last 12 hours. Matt Nippett's done a very good piece looking at the Waipareira Trust and its loans to John Tamahiri of $350,000, which he spent on political activity for the Party Māori, which he is president of, and his own mayoral campaign. It would appear the Charities Commission has taken a very soft line on this and has accepted the assurances that the Waipareira Trust, which is run by John Tamahiri, will get John Tamahiri to pay himself back over time the inappropriately spent money, and nothing else is going to happen. That seems strange to me, David.
Well, the Charities Commission should be enforcing the laws without fear or favour, and I think they should be especially cautious with someone like John Tamahiri because my experience of him, going all the way back to when he applied to run a charter school when I was in charge of that, he signed up the contract and then he tried to renegotiate everything at the last minute in public. He's a guy who thinks that the rules don't apply to him, and if the Charities Commission are serious about upholding the law, then first of all, they should do it without fear nor favour, and second of all, they should be extra cautious about someone who somehow thinks that the treaty exempts him from being subject to the laws.
But they say they're going to check in from time to time to see if he's paid himself the money back. Isn't that good enough?
Well, that's what you'd expect to do, is to demand an action and then check that it's been done. That in itself sounds like a normal course of events. The question is, are they going to actually check? That's the first thing we need to watch. And number two, what is their escalation strategy if he doesn't follow the law? Ultimately, if the Waipareira Trust is not compliant with the charities laws that we expect of every other charity, then I think they should be struck off, and that is a serious consequence that I think they will be keen to avoid.
All right, David, I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. That is David Seymour, leader of the ACT Party.